Thank you all for being here today, specifically our panelists. The idea here is to have a conversation about TK and pre-K and what are some of the differences and um, try to answer some questions that have been sent in to us, as well as helping parents to have a little bit more clarity around these decisions. So we've invited some panelists today, all of which work with children in different capacities. So I would love to start with just a quick introduction of each of you, each of the panelists, and we are going to keep all of the people watching on mute. And if you have questions that you'd like to drop in the chat, feel free, and we will catch them at the end if we haven't already answered them. So, and I see Melissa is popping on right now. Thank you. Hi, Melissa. So we are going to get started. Who would like to do the first introduction? April?
Hi,
Thank
I'm April Taylor. I am an educator in the Mount Diablo School District. I've been an educator for 15 years in the school district, and before that, I did work at a preschool. So I have lots of experience with children's education.
Awesome, thank you. And also want to add that we would not be here if not for April and I having a conversation at an art and wine festival about TK, and she had this great idea to have this conversation. So thanks, April. I'm going to go in order of what I see. Can Patty go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Patty Sermon. I work for We Care Services for Children as both a child and family therapist and a preschool consultant. So, working with families and teachers as they navigate kind of social emotional supports for children at their schools and really navigating some of these questions about what are the needs of my child and how does that sort of land when it comes to these decisions from sometimes a preschool where they're really familiar and it's a community they're trusting to what steps are next. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Patty. Ashley, you go next.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm a solo BCBA. I work at Brushy Creek Behavior Consulting. I've been a BCBA for 10 years and work specifically with neurodivergent children and their families across settings, including preschools. So, yeah, happy to be here.
And Jennifer?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer. I am a speech language pathologist. I have been in practice for 13 years, primarily working with children in the early intervention program, and then as they transition out of that program into preschool, TK, pre-K, into kindergarten as well. Here at a local clinic, SPG Therapy and Education, we've got a couple different locations, and we provide services in our clinics, our homes, out in daycares and local community programs such as Kid Time.
And Melissa, last but not least.
Hey everyone, my name is Melissa Solorio. I work alongside Patty at We Care Services for Children, and I'm a preschool consultant. I have been doing preschool consultation for a year now, but before that, I actually worked out at our preschool as a behavior specialist, and worked alongside teachers and supporting young children in meeting some of their goals and supporting in social emotional regulation skills and things like that. And I'm happy to be here today.
We really appreciate everyone's time. And just so anyone knows who's watching, everyone here is volunteering their time. This is just out of the kindness of everyone's heart. So I really, really appreciate you being here for this. So I have several questions that we collected. So I'm just going to start at the top. And any of you that have feeling or particular on any of these questions, please unmute yourself and feel free to chime in. Oh, I guess I'll do my intro too. I'm Leah Rosenthal Cambic. I am the executive director and owner of Kid Time Inc. And I have been a preschool person since the late 90s. I have been with Kid Time almost 30 years, and I have a lot of feelings about TK and pre-K and what options are offered out there. And one of what I think is one of my most important jobs is helping parents to navigate some of these hard decisions. So that's my motivation today. I'm not here to, purport my own school. I'm really here to thinking about the larger field in general and children and what their needs are. So the first question that I see a lot of from people either reaching out or in moms groups, it seems like a lot of people don't realize they have a choice. And I'm wondering if any of you have opinions or have encountered this. It seems like a lot of parents are under the impression that their child will be behind if they do not go to TK. I see April is nodding pretty heavy over there. I don't know if you might want to weigh in, and I certainly have some thoughts on this as well, but I'll mute myself first.
Yeah, so first of all, you absolutely have the option. It is not required in the state of California for your child to attend TK. It actually just started as a way to have a place for those kids in between with the birthday cutoff, and their birthdays were after September 1st. But what do they do? They graduated out of preschool, but they can't start kindergarten. So that's kind of where it kind of stemmed from. And then the state of California said, oh, we need to figure out a childcare situation for people. And here we are, TK for all. So you have a choice. And if your child absolutely does not need to go to TK at a public school or even a private school before they feed into kindergarten, our California state standards start at kindergarten. We have kindergartners walk in the door all the time that have never had a day in a TK in a traditional classroom setting. So there's no entry test. There's nothing like that. So your child would not be behind if they did not start in TK.
I'm going to also add to the mix that child cares like mine have been providing pre-kindergarten since most of us since the 80s, when there started to be a little bit more of an academic push in child cares. So a lot of people are confused about TK and pre-K, but they are effectively the same thing. Preschool, as we consider it, is ages 2 through 6, and pre-K, as we call it, is the last year of preschool before they go to kindergarten. So we have been providing care and quality academic care and preparation for kindergarten for 40 plus years. So there is definitely another option. It doesn't have to be that, if you don't go to TK, you're going to be just lost. Did anyone else want to say? I think Patty?
I do. I have one as well. As someone who works with young children who receive early intervention services, which is services provided by the state up until their child's 3rd birthday. There is a process that most families go through, which is a transition process. And in that, the families are provided with local programs and then the next form of funding for their child. So that typically rolls into your local public school district. That's where federal or state funding typically goes. And some families think that's the right option. I've got to go there because that's where my child can get services. That's the only place they're going to get supports. And it's just not true. There are many places and many different options for families that have children that have additional needs when they're thinking about preschool or pre-K and TK and as they're getting moved forward. So I sometimes have families go, well, this is just the next thing we have to do, versus being able to have a more robust conversation around, well, what other options are out there, or what other community-based programs are available? So maybe my child is in a place where they know everybody and everything's moving in the right direction, and we want some continuity rather than a whole switch up before we go. And it's, of course, options to think about, but another piece I see.
Awesome.
I also just wanted to add that this idea of what does it mean to be behind and that there is maybe this sense of pressure of getting a head start academically, but one measure that we look at is not just, I think, also academics to think about, but the social emotional piece that is also a strong measure that kids are working on at this time. So when I think about, are they, readiness for TK or for kindergarten, one of the things to think about is there's many, many different facets of that we look at in readiness, and it's not just about the academics and shapes and colors and ABCs, but also like what is the child's sense of the community that they have and their social relationships.
I'm so happy you said social emotional because I am a preschool person and that is what we exist for. We are all about that. And I think that is something that is kind of glaringly missing in what the expectations are for our little friends going off. And where I sit being in preschool, it's our final year with the children, right? That's the year that we really are doing any kindergarten readiness, because social emotional always comes first. But as part of their pre-kindergarten year, we're focused on not just academics. It's self-care, it's taking care of their own needs, it's their social emotional, it's their motor skills, their fine and gross motor skills, it's independence, it's being able to separate from parents and at drop-off time. It's potty, so many different things. And one of my concerns as an educator in early childhood is, have we forgotten to pay attention to those things? And are there, for friends that really need that extra help, we have kids that we work with every day who are very comfortable at our programs who have a hard time at drop off every day and need to be held or a hand or something, and here we are sending them to a very big environment where that's not always possible. I don't know if anyone else wanted to weigh in on this question before we move forward. This is sort of in the similar vein of what we were just discussing, but the people are asking about the requirements and expectations for entering TK. I had a hard time finding anything that mentioned anything social emotional, and I reached out to April prior to the call, and she reached out to some friends that teach TK, and she verified that no, there isn't anything that I'm going to find out there. But you know that is a huge concern to me because we teach our teachers. It is all about how we interact with the children. How do we speak to the children? We need to know, as educating, if we're educating 4-year-olds, how to speak to 4-year-olds. And they're very different animals than a 6, 7, 8-year-old. They really are still so young and new and fresh on this earth. And there's so much that they don't come in with. And so that's something that I have a lot of concern about, is that are these social and emotional pieces being addressed, or are we sort of dressing up 4-year-olds like 5-year-olds and putting them in a classroom that they're not ready for?
Yeah. So, there aren't any actual like entry standards for social emotional needs or really anything. They don't have to be potty trained. They don't have to have anything except a birth date that fits the requirement and they live in that area and can sign up for that site's program. And I one of the biggest concerns that I see is the ratio of students to teacher in the classroom in a TK environment. It's a much larger ratio. They usually have a regular teacher and then one aide. And I've often seen the aides, we're human, we get sick and they're out, and there's not always a substitute aide. So sometimes that TK teacher is on their own. And some of the programs are half day, and then they go to some type of aftercare at the site or another site so the kids are splitting the day. But some of our sites have full day, so like 7:50 to 2:45 of almost one person with 31 students to entertain that are just 4 years old. And a lot of that time is spent sitting in a desk, which to me, developmentally, a 4-year-old should not be sitting in a desk. um, at all. So it's a really hard thing to see. And they have potty needs at different times, and they start to follow a elementary schedule already of this is your recess, this is your break, this is your potty time, this is your snack time, and it doesn't allow for the developmental needs of a 4-year-old.
And just for context, I just want to throw out there that preschools that are offering pre-K, like for example, my school has 28 students in the pre-kindergarten class. That's with 3 full-time teachers. So very, very different ratios. And our state standard is 12 to 1, which we still think is too high, even for 4-year-olds. They still have a lot of needs, and some of them are freshly potty training or just started or are in the process, so we always need to have extra sets of hands around. That 30 with 1 baffles my mind. Did anyone else want to weigh in on question number 2, or we'll move forward? Okay. There have been some questions raised about if my child is neurodivergent or if they need services. Jennifer, you started to touch on this with speech, but what is there truth to the notion that you have to be enrolled in school to receive services, that you need to be part of that system to be able for your child to be able to receive what they need?
I can definitely speak to that. So from what I have seen, when it is district to district, so it is going to be a conversation point to have. And a lot of families assume if I go, the school will tell me what those services are, and I am obligated to those services. I'm tied to those services. I have no say in those services. But an individual education plan or program really is going to consider the entire team, and the families are a part of that team. And the families should have a big say in what success would look like for their child and what kind of supports that would be. A few examples I have seen are some children who, based on the team that were coming together, they determined that a classroom setting at a public school district wasn't going to be their best supports. However, they still said, you know what, you can come for speech therapy services 1 time a week. You can come for occupational therapy 1 time a week and still have access to those services, but not need to be full-time or part-time enrolled in the actual academic or classroom on a public school site. So I have seen that happen. There's advocates out there that can help work with families and make sure that they feel confident having these conversations with the local public school district. And then the other piece is private insurances or state insurances. Some of those as well will pick up services or provide some level of service, and families don't think that they have access to that as well. And those would be either within the organization that you are with, or it could be a local therapy office. That's the word I was looking for. Therapy office as well that could have access to that. And then some therapy offices have cash prices where you're like, you know what? We don't want to pursue anything else, but we want a therapist who is really just going to be our partner in this next phase and see where we're going, and able to have the flexibility to come in and say, great, what do we want to do? How do we want to do it? We get to be the true drivers of this next phase for their child.
I think also just along those lines of neurodivergence or kiddos who have mental health needs or concerns with behavior. I think, something to think about also, like our organization, we're able to serve, and again, through insurance, we're able to serve 0 to 6 years old. And so I think it is important that parents feel like they do have choice. One of the things that we are not able to do, for example, is like we work in the preschools, but once a child is in the public school district, they have to, usually they're limited to the staff who are at that district. And so we couldn't necessarily come in and provide the same support where preschools, because they're privately run and everything, there's flexibility for us to come in. So again, I just think that adds to the layer of decision making that parents are having. What do services look like for my child to either continue or have that? Is that in the school district itself? Is that in the preschool? Is that in my home? So that's another thing that they're navigating.
Thank you, Patty. That's actually a really good point, and I'm surprised I didn't ever think of that because you all have been coming to our sites for so many years, helping us when we have behavior issues, that it didn't occur to me you couldn't do that in a kindergarten classroom or a TK classroom. And I will say your services are amazing. You guys have been an incredible help to us over the years with many different kids. Did anyone else want to weigh in on this one?
I think just to stress the importance of what Patty already shared, I mean, it's huge. And when, for example, I had an observation in a public school this week and they gave me 30 minutes, right? So I totally understand policy. I mean, I understand it. But to say when parents are making choices of where they want to move forward in their child's journey, if they're still receiving ongoing, say, ABA therapy, speech therapy, OT, and they have a full schedule already of private services, um, finding ways to have a system that works for them to reduce their mental load and stress by pushing into locations that are open to having those private providers who are working on goals outside of an academic driven program. That's the other difference, separate topic. That's something that should be considered because when you're going in and getting those school-based services, they're great. There's nothing wrong with them, but you have to understand you're talking a educational model versus something for better or worse, since it's being billed to your insurance, a medical model. And we have a little more movement in what we can work on those things as well.
Thank you for that as well. One thing that keeps crossing my mind is thinking about something I always used to say when I would tour our program to parents, and I would say to them, every child is so vastly different, and there are so many different kinds of preschools out there for a reason. There are Montessori's, there are play based, there are more academically based, there are places that are absolutely no screens, there are places that do lean on screens. There are so many different types of places out there. There is something for every child, and being in the field, I've never looked at other preschools as competitors because we are our own animal, and most of us, you can't really compare us. We're apples to oranges, but we're now taking those same children and saying, okay, here's your cookie cutter. This is what we're doing. You all should fit this mold, and that's definitely concerning to me as an early childhood professional. Anyone else have anything to add on this one, on number 3? Okay, we'll move forward. The fourth question, and April, I may need to get a little help from you on this one. If my child is not potty trained fully or has trouble doing self care independently, is TK right for them? Can What are the requirements? I've heard people say that the school district that they are not allowed to help change children. So if that's the case, are parents getting phone calls every time there's potty accident?
So the good news is that has been updated. Previously not, but with the date changes, like kids can start at they're still 3. So definitely going to have some students that are not potty trained yet. So the TK teachers, at least in the district I'm in, have been trained to properly be able to assist with changing for bathroom needs. It's just not it's just not the same as the preschool environments that I've seen and those and like just the setup even alone the privacy the way that it's like the schools are already there. The institutions are there and they're just fitting it in. And they're like, well, this is now the bathroom situation for, TK. So I don't think it's the best option. But if your child is in TK, you don't need to worry. There is somebody that is able to change them and care for them. They're not going to have a rash or, a wet diaper when they go home. They will be changed. And a lot of them, just like in a preschool, will be like, keep a change of clothes in the backpack and and things or the pull-ups and the diapers and the things. But yeah, it's just not, again, when you have the ratios, they're so much larger, it's even having the two adults in there and then you've got three kids that need a potty change, like how does that even really look?
I'm glad to hear they've at least addressed that piece because I know in the past that wasn't the case. That does make sense since they've lowered the age a little bit more now. Um, so thank you for addressing that. One of a concern I have from an early childhood perspective is I see people now rushing their child into potty training so that they are ready for TK. And personally, I know every school does it differently, but in our company, we do not push potty training. It is really more about when the child is ready than when we are ready. And so I have a lot of concerns about that sort of rushing and pushing and turning that into a whole big control issue that is not necessary for them. Um, did anyone else want to weigh in on this question? Okay, keep it going. Um, Next question is, are there children who are technically ready for TK academically, but might benefit for another year of pre-K socially or emotionally? I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll mute and let somebody else talk first.
Can share some support if that's helpful. Um, because especially if you have like a twice exceptional, like a 2E kid, they may be so bright, but are still working self-advocacy. And um, when I refer to like social skills, I don't mean in the neurotypical sense. I mean social skills that that individual child needs to survive themselves and advocate for themselves. So when I say that, that's what I'm referring to. So I think in that circumstance, there's some benefit to staying in a placement where you have that flexibility, a lower ratio, and a safer environment to practice and hone those skills. And once we've already kind of like talked about what ratio in the district school is going to look like. And you're not going to have maybe the potential to have someone that's there supporting your student there privately that maybe has that expertise. So that's one consideration I would note, especially for those highly intelligent, very bright learners who just need to catch up a little bit in the other areas.
Ashley, you are so right. As a speech language pathologist and meeting many young children who can tell me their entire alphabet, every shape, every number, counts 1 to 100. They just know everything about airplanes or a particular thing, but they get in a classroom and it's stimulating. They don't have a space for breaks and they hold it together. And then they fall apart at the end of the day. And they're stressed, and you're like, oh, we need more time and more spaces and more adjustments for like where you are and building that confidence and maturity to say, okay, great. Now I can talk with my peers and engage with them. I can build a relationship with a teacher and my aides in order to ask for a break or request that break when it's happening and be like, oh, this is a lot for me because they're so young. I mean, I've met a lot of kids over the years and even children that are, I would say, on a path that wouldn't indicate neurodiversity or something that is different than the norm. Those kids also, I've seen them. My niece and nephew would come home and I'm like, oh, you're exhausted. Like you need to take a break. So I think sometimes I see that where are we asking so much of them academically and asking so much of them social emotionally and not meeting them where they're at. And then that's just draining their capacity overall. That's what I've seen.
I could not agree more. And I think the amount of overwhelm that is possible in this scenario for a child that is not neurotypical or has any other area that they're working on. I have known some of the brightest students I've ever worked with were neurodivergent and they were brilliant little geniuses, but they needed a lot of support socially. And there again, it's that other side of the coin that we cannot ignore. We in preschool, at least in my world, we believe that the social and emotional comes first. Once we have met those needs and that child is comfortable and safe in their environment, that's when the learning happens and the learning comes easily. Otherwise, we're banging our head against the wall trying to teach when they're not able to sit, they're not able to get comfortable talking to stranger new teachers, making new friends. It has to start somewhere, and the academics is almost the last piece. Before we had TK, for all of the years in the past, when our cutoff, the age cutoff was December to go to kindergarten, we always encouraged people to wait. We always encouraged almost every single child who had an opportunity to wait, because you're extending their childhood. And why would we rush to get out of childhood even faster? It's just something that does not make sense to me, having spent so much time with this age group. I could go on, but let me see if anyone else would like to.
I can add, it just, even past TK, past kindergarten, and later elementary, the social emotional piece, if it's missing, I see it every day. My students don't learn. If basic needs are not met, if you're hungry, if you're tired, if you're just exhausted, if there was a fight at home, anything going on, and those other needs have not been taken care of, there it's like a wall is up and the students can't learn. And so if the self-regulating and all of those things for all children are taught at a much earlier age, and they're able to do that through play and just not rushing, and I have to finish this worksheet and I have to get this done, it's going to make things in their life so much better for the rest of their journey of learning and just being a human. Because I see the anxiety in my students for all sorts of things, and I they all have different backgrounds, but it just, like Leah said, the word rush, that's absolutely what's happening to what I see. It's like a rush to get into school, and they still need to be kids, they still need to play. And even if they're ready academically and they know all of those things and they can already do with some addition, that's great. That's awesome. Keep that up. But also, let's remember to play and not be so focused on all of that, because it will be all there waiting for them in kindergarten.
Just want to jump in on April's emphasis on play and free play. And one of the things that maybe just parents are contrasting is what is what does play look like in TK versus in preschool, where free play with still age appropriate toys and imagination and fantasy and problem solving and planning with other peers, that is all work, right? And then being able to express how they feel when something has happened, and access help and alert a trusted familiar grown up, right? So these are all things that I think is really also important when parents are assessing what will my child need during times of like free play. Do they still have that access, and will they have that intermittently to all of the academic seated types of activities that they sometimes have? How prolonged are those attention seated kind of activities too?
Just to also add, in our pre kindergarten classroom, we do a small group activity every day, which is what we call our academic learning. It's usually a fine motor activity. It is with a group of typically between about 7 or 8 kids per group, and it is truly a small group. It lasts about 15 minutes. So, the amount of sitting down and being quiet, we have on our website, it says sitting down and being quiet is not a marketable job skill. And I just love that phrase. But what you're saying, Patty, reminds me too of another quote that I adore by Bev Boz, who's one of our play-based heroes. She was a pioneer in play-based preschool, and she said, "If it hasn't been in the hand and the heart, it can't be in the brain." And that is the way we look at every activity. If their hands are not in it, if they're not touching it, interacting with it, if it's not a concept that is tangible to them, it may as well just go right over their head. So it's really about that being physical and involved, and like you said, the large amount of free play. That is where so much learning, and what kind of learning? Mostly that social emotional, learning how to share space with others, learning how to take turns, all of that stuff that makes the teacher's job really hard or really easy, right? If they have those skills. Anyone else want to jump in on this question?
Yeah, there was just one thing I wanted to add when, we're thinking about the readiness of a child, and whether, TK is, the right fit for them. I think it's also thinking about the separation and comfort with an adult, right? So it's like for most kids, this is their first years in school in a different environment outside of, the people that they know in their home, their caregivers, right? So what is the child's response, right? For example, like at drop off, right? And it's not to say that the child can't cry and, you know, that because they're not crying, that shows is that they're ready, or I think it's just how do they respond after the separation, right? So it's like, can they eventually connect with the adult in the classroom, right? Are they able to then engage and participate in the classroom environment, the classroom setting? And I think that also ties into the communication needs, right? Are they able to kind of express these needs and be aware of what their body is needing, right? And in order to kind of co-regulate or self-regulate themselves, I think these are all things, right, to kind of think about and take into consideration as, we're thinking about what determines the readiness of a child.
Thank you, Melissa. That's really a great point. And it also reminded me that when they're going to TK, they're also probably going to some sort of an after school care. And so now you've got two transitions in their day, two big new groups of humans. In many after school programs, they're intermingled with kids up to fifth grade. There might be parts of the day where they're just with the younger. So there's a lot of adjustment and a lot of getting used to new teachers and all of that. So I think it's important to remember that most TKs are 3 hours a day, which means you've got several more hours if you're a working family to keep that child busy, and they may be with kids that are not in their developmental range at all. The next question is probably more specifically for you, Jennifer, about speech. If a child is having difficulty being understood by adults or peers, should that affect their pre-K, TK decision, and how would you advise someone in that situation?
Absolutely. So this is a layered question because it is a lot of elements that I consider when I'm like, okay, what is going to be best for you as the child, your family? There's dynamics of cost that go into this as well, and access to various programs and resources. Biggest thing for me is if I have a young child and I'm like, okay, they're going into a preschool TK situation, and they can't tell me what they did during the day, or they can't communicate what happened during the day, then I am now relying on the adults, the teachers, the aides, to have enough connection and touch points, like connection points in the day to know what happened with their child. So it's big for me to go, okay, well, what does that communication look like? Is a teacher with a 30 student classroom going to be able to tell me what happened with their child today, versus if we're in a ratio where that number is much smaller and we have people who have the expertise to really understand and support young children to go, oh, they did this today, or they really enjoyed this, or this was, a component that families want to know. So I think it's really important to think about and know ahead of time what communication looks like when we have a young child who can't reliably communicate. And then the other piece is the type of therapy, right? So it's like if your child needs therapy because they're like, their articulation's behind, their language is behind, is what would feel the most supportive to you as a family. So some families, that is a traditional local public school district TK program, right? They're like, based on everything, that's what we feel confident moving forward with. And other families, it might be, no, I want to be in that therapy session, because traditionally you don't get to be a part of the speech therapy session in a TK program. You drop your child off, they see that speech therapist, maybe you get a note home, you get a progress report every 3-6 months to know what's going on, versus an insurance based, or so medically based or a privately based program where you are not all, I shouldn't say all, but most programs are like, you want that family in there. The whole point of helping your child in these early years is you probably spend maybe 1 hour with a therapist a week. That's not where change happens. Change doesn't happen 1 hour a week in with your therapist. The change happens when those people around you have the resources, the strategies, and the success to say, okay, great, we know what we're doing. We're going to practice that all week until we see Miss Jen the next week. And that might be the family, might be aunts and uncles, could be our teachers at our local programs that are open to having therapists come in. I mean, I have gone to many programs and I come in and the teacher will tell me, oh my gosh, they said this new word this week. Or, oh my gosh, I can't imagine, like they did this week. Oh, we're hearing so many new words. We're hearing that. And I'm like, oh gosh, what have you been doing? And they're like, oh, well, we, provided this support, or we did what you modeled for us last week. And I was like, that's exactly the magic that you're looking for to support. So it's complicated. There's a lot to consider, but that's where I come from.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And, it brings to mind to me how often I see messages going home to parents from our teachers or our directors saying, we've noticed this, or we'd like to keep an eye on that. A lot of times, our preschool teachers are the ones that are the first sort of the front lines, right? And they're the ones that notice the outlying behaviors more than the parents, because that might be your only child and this is your first rodeo. So you don't really know what to compare it to. So I think that is a huge, huge point. And if you are in an environment where you're fortunate enough that your teachers really know your children, that matters to me more than most things. I know when my son was in preschool, obviously I had the advantage of I hired all of his teachers, but I also knew that, they really did know him. They understood him. If something was off, they knew it. They would alert me if he was having an off day. And that's because they had the bandwidth, because they didn't have too many students with them, to really hone in and know him the way that they needed to. Um, this question may feel, I'm going to kind of put the last two together because it might feel a little redundant otherwise, but could a smaller play-based pre-K environment be a better fit for a child who struggles with regulation? Even if that child is academically advanced, we sort of touched on that already, but I'm wondering, you know, kind of to push it to the next question too. If your child is receiving speech services, OT, ABA, other developmental services, which most of you provide some version of that, what should parents consider when choosing TK versus pre-K? And this can also be a final question, kind of what would you like to leave the parents with today? So whoever would like to go first.
I just left an IEP meeting today about this, so I can share today a little bit. I'm like, oh, that's timely. Um, yeah, I would say if you have any type of more intensive services ongoing, to consider and not feel rushed. And I love that that word came up earlier. And as a parent of young children in this era of fast, 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 let's get it done, potty train in 3 days, make your kids sleep through the night. I mean, we are bombarded with rushing, right? And it's not the answer for most things I've found, especially with a strong-willed, almost 3-year-old. So what I would say for families to consider, and this kind of go with this, is don't feel like you have to rush out of your services. Look for a placement that you can have continuity of care. Finding a preschool location that has a demonstrated history of collaboration and being open. I know, like my son's school, there's a child receiving services there, and I was like immediately green flag, like, because what if he ever needed them? Then I know that we'd be able to coordinate something. So having that demonstrated history of openness, willingness, and collaboration is going to be absolutely paramount for your considerations of your child's placement. And no more rushing.
I would leave families with explore your options and go with your gut. You are their parents. You know them the best. You know what feels right and what does not feel right. So with some families, I say, you know what, explore it. Go through the IEP process, have the evaluation, see what they have to offer, ask to meet the teachers, ask to see the locations. And if you feel like, wow, this feels really good for us, go forward, do it. If not, you can say, thank you so much for your time. You have now an IEP for a whole year and they will be there. They're not going anywhere. So you can say, we don't want to at this time. We're going to go explore other options and see what we want to do and always go back and circle around. So I know some were like, oh, if I sign up, then I've got to do it. But no, you for you and your family, you don't necessarily need to do it. Find the people and find the supports that feel right for you all. That's what I would leave with.
I'd like to second that. I think that it's so important for you to feel right, to be comfortable where you're dropping your child off every single day. And just you can tour places, you can ask to visit the campuses, the preschools, all the things. And if you do sign up for something and it's not working, don't be afraid to change it. Don't be afraid to say, let's go try something else. You don't have to be stuck for an entire school year, calendar year. um, Find the right fit for you and your family.
Yeah, I think one thing I wanted to also add is, there isn't really like a checklist, right, to determine whether a child's ready. I think it's more than, just academics. It's all of what we talked about today, right? Of really kind of knowing and understanding what the child is, right? Like if how they interact with others, the way that they communicate, if, the way that the independence of a child is, right? So I think it's really knowing what's best for your child, right? And looking at their strengths, their needs, and just kind of the personality that can help, kind of guide these decisions. And I think like Jennifer said, right, like as a parent, you hold that decision. And I think sometimes the pressure could be a lot, but I think just being mindful that, it is your choice, right? And I think as parents, you would know, right, what's best for your child. But I think just asking the questions too. I think that's one thing.
Was just going to say, I think the goal eventually for all the children is self-regulation, but it starts out in relationship with a grown-up co-regulating. Melissa sort of started on that. And so that is something to think about. What is this classroom's offer of how to help my child get to a place of comfort? and and of course not, children will be doing hard things that are not always their favorite. It's not always going to be, their favorite playtime. And so those skills of coping, where can they learn that best? With practice. So those are the things that maybe I would leave off with, is your child will also be really much having a say in their sense of readiness, right? So we listen to the cues of the child, whether that's siblings who are very different, and what, one older sibling, it might be different for the younger sibling. So really also tune in to what your child is telling you.
I wanted to say to leave you with reminder that childhood is very short. 18 years is not a long time, and those first 5 years are the blink of an eye. My old boss, who started Kid Time, used to always say to us, 2-year-olds have only been on this planet for 800 days. You can measure their life in days, and that's not a lot of days. That's not a lot of time. And I have never in all of my years had a parent tell me that they regretted giving their child the gift of a longer childhood or a little bit more time before moving them along. And I know, there is definitely a cost differential. Childcare costs money, and it is very difficult for those of us out there who are parent pay primarily to compete with something free. But as a reminder, after school care is not free. And what I would consider, if I were in that position, would be to measure the difference between what you're paying for preschool, what you will be paying for after school care. Take that number, multiply it by 9, and ask yourself, is 9 months of this extra money going to be worth it to give my child another year of being a young child? It's really not that big of a difference at the end of the day, but it does feel different when you're realizing you can pull out of preschool. But do your research, do the math, and weigh that. Is there anybody else that wanted to say anything before we finish up here? All right. Well, I just want to thank you all so much. I really appreciate your time very much. And for anyone who is on the call and wants a copy of the recording, I will be posting it after the fact, and I'll be posting it for the community as well. Please share it. Send it along to your friends, anybody you know that's having a hard time with this decision. And really, we're looking at talking to people whose kids are 2 and 3 right now, because you're making these decisions in the next year to 2 years. So thank you all so much, and we really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.